Right, hello again. Let's continue our series on various space scenes. And this particular one will focus on creating those moons with some craters. And I want to explore some of the techniques I used here. It really all started with a cup of coffee. I think here's a picture that I took early on in my coffee mug. Top-down view with a lot of foam. This is a very rich in foam and a little bit of milk too. Coffee cup of coffee. One thing that I like a lot is those bubbles. If you look at it, not only there you go. Let's zoom in here. So you see something here that may be the main shape for the crater, but there's also a ridge in the middle. And those spikes that you see here on occasion, those will add some additional realism to the crater, because many times an impact crater will have also a little peak in the middle where some of the ejected material kind of comes back together or collapses. So this actually helps in making it even more interesting looking. So the first thing to do is to grab that picture or one that you've already trimmed a little bit. Here's one which is a little bit smaller. I'm gonna go with the original. Let's start this one here. So I might open it first in earphone view and then Control C for copying that, minimize that, go over to Howler. And let's do let's see, image, clipboard, paste new image. Right, you can do this, or you can do Control V, or after you have the keyboard focus, you may need to click on the image here or on the side to get the keyboard focus. And then when you do Control V, you have a couple of options, including to create to replace the existing image, and thus creating a new one. Now, if I'm using my my zoom function here, click and drag, I can make it down to seeing everything, and I might not need to keep as much of the crater. Maybe I only of the coffee area, maybe only a portion here. So I'm going to delineate with the lasso roughly the area that I want, something like this. And then I might just crop to that selection. And so what it does is it finds a bounding box containing that area that I selected. And it's obviously going to be a little bit bigger than the area because the corners here I did not select, but it has to crop to a rectangular area. What I can do is further refine that and say, let's zoom in on about this much. Okay, let's select that area. And again, crop to selection. So now I have the area that I'd like to turn into a planet. Let's go store this one here. Store an image copy. A smart thing would be also to save it. And I'll just skip that for the brevity of the tutorial. But one thing you can do here already is turn this into a grayscale. Something like this here. Image, grayscale. I like the expose through lens because there you get to control a little bit more how much contrast you get based on how reddish or bluish or non-bluish the different parts of the images are. And so here we are. And so now we could start with some lighting on that. I'm going to store this one here too. And we now have two stored images. One place with the lighting that I did earlier in another video was to go to the stylize and the lighting tool, right? And so when you put the lighting tool there, you can see this. And in fact, let me go cancel that and go back to the colored version and apply stylize lighting. There you go. So you see that there are some colors still showing through, and that's the function of this, multiply to original. If you go all the way to the right, you don't have any of that. If you go to the left, you have a lot of it, and so you get to keep some of that coloring. You can also adjust how far the light source is. You can go right here in the preview and place it somewhere. Brightness, elevation, and brightness. Make the two work together. There is a texture height that can also give you a nice transition from no embossing at all to a lot of embossing. And the specular highlights make it a bit more of a glossy, like look like a wet surface, like a frozen planet with some wet parts that are reflective, and give you some specular highlights. Other things you can do, perhaps there's too much noise here, right? There's a lot of granularity, a lot of detail, and if you reduce the smoothness here, you get to focus a bit more on just the really big features, the big shapes, the big craters in this case here. So that could be also really interesting. Find the middle ground where you have some decent amount of craters, not too many small ones, not too high impact, something like this. And I'm sure you can quickly get to maybe have the lighting in the upper left, somewhere around there, a little bit higher, less intense, a little bit higher. There you go. And that already gives you a nice little sense of lighting that you could use to create something like this. Now, the reason we want to get to that point is the next step. And if I store this, put this aside, the next step is to wrap this around the sphere, to spherize it. So we'll go to the sphere tool under the transform collection here, the transform filters. Let's go here, spherize it, and wrap this on a sphere. And there's already a light over here, kind of in the same area as where we were with the over here, as you see in the preview that we stored in the stylize tool. So that's good. We have a second, more of a bluish tint light source, and we have the first light over here. And you can use perhaps a directional light. You can adjust the brightness of these, or the tint, more of a reddish. Maybe there's a red giant star somewhere there. You can change the specular highlight. You can also add some additional bump noise, like terrain, that will intensify that 3D appearance there, especially if you work also with the specular and the hardness, something like that. The amount of that, don't overdo it. Be careful there not to give it too much of that. There's plenty to go here. Let's see, something like this. Okay, there's also an ambient amount you can add if you don't want it to be too harsh, too high contrast. And you can change those later too. You can adjust the contrast. But here's a good start. Let's capture this one. That would be one of our planets. Let's go and one thing you want to do is perhaps have this planet picked up against a transparent background. So one thing you could do is simply select the background with the magic wand and select it like so, and then invert the selection. Invert it like this, and so now you should have just the inside of the planet selected. You might see initially a trailing line on the right side here, but that's not marching ants anymore, not animated. So it's indicating that really the only selection you have is on the inside now, after having inverted that selection. So you can go and use the selected as a brush, and that will now allow you to store it and manage it, and you'll see that it has a transparent background. There's this splat pattern showing here. So that's one of the planets. Let's go minimize this, and certainly that's an image you may want to save as well, or a brush that you can save here, and save it as a PNG image or something like that. You can paint with it, click it, and then place it wherever you want. As you manage it here, you can also change the size of it. You can change the opacity is not full initially here. There you go. Now you have a fully opaque. You have also the tint you can change, hue, saturation. Let's say the hue, a bit more of a greenish or a bluish frozen planet look. There you go. So many different ways to use this. Let's go back to this one here, or this one, and look at a different technique. This time I'm going to look at the 3D designer, and let's see. There it is, 3D designer. And with the 3D designer, you have a full 3D look of that terrain based on the elevation map. So we can go and tilt it like this, perhaps give it less of the perspective, more of a flat look, but still adjust the elevation here. Right, so keep in mind that you have, if you look at it from the side, let's go a little bit of an angle, you have the elevation that you control here. You don't want it totally flat, but you also, so you want to see some of these craters here. You want to also add a few things, right? So one thing, the light source, you may want to position it again, maybe on the left side, upper left, and the zenith and the brightness, adjust those a little bit, and then do a little bit of smoothing so you don't have too much of the fine detail. Adjust perhaps a specular reflection, and also the shading, the shadows here. Do the ray traced soft shadows, so that now if you lower this light source, you'll see you can have some fairly long shadows cast here, and so that can give you a nice touch of 3D appearance too. Look at that. Look at this, just tiny little bit. It doesn't take much. Just a little bit. There you go. And again, if you want it to look a little bit more like a wet surface, you can add some specular reflection to that. And then maybe erosion. If this is the surface of a planet, okay, so it's been bombarded with asteroids, and you see some impact craters, but there's also in the past maybe been some erosion effects, so you can add some of that and add some sediments deposited. In fact, one thing that's pretty cool too is if you add some coloration to the texture, you can make it look like it's a frozen planet with some snow. To take the grass away though, make the green go kind of a bluish frozen appearance. We do need some more light. Let's give it this one here, and let's make it all the way high altitude, minimal zenith. So we have a bit of a frozen planet here. Let's see, that's the snow caps. And that's the frozen. Oh, and that's nice too, because you can now have it look like it's maybe not frozen, maybe it's liquid water or something like that, right? And you can have it fill in the parts that are low, the low elevation. In fact, you can do that with the fog too. There's the ground fog, right? Now the ground fog is going to be the same color as the background, so you need to give it some sort of a bluish tint if that's what you're seeking here, right? So that now the ground fog is filling this in. You can adjust the low level of the ground fog, and in the end just make it face us, something like this. What else could we do here? So we have the appearance we can change dramatically, right? From one level like this, no snow cap. Next season in the winter we have a lot of snow. Play with these parameters too here. These will also have a fairly big impact on the appearance. Very different types of planets here. Okay, let's give it something like this. And then you might want to even have it colored so that it fills in those sediments with a rock color or with the snow color. And you get, you really get this thing appearing like it's been a very cold winter night. Let's see. All right, so we'll go with this. Let's finalize that erosion a little bit. Let's give it a little bit more on the rainfall. Let's give it 50 here, and the flatness threshold. Now, if you increase the flatness threshold, what's going to happen is that it's going to make it look like we have a more frozen planet. Much of the holes, many of the dimples will go away, and that will look just much smoother. And you can also change it here with the pre-filter, and then do your final render at high level anti-aliasing. You could also let's see what else. One more thing we could do is ambient occlusion. Add a little bit of that. That can help in reducing, or in bringing out some features that are otherwise dark and hidden, so you can see a little bit better here. Let's go without it for this time, and just make sure it's not too bright. There you go. We do want some shading from the side though, so let's make sure that this lighting here is doing really well. We want it kind of in the upper left corner, and then reduce this one, make it darker away, and bring it down a little bit so we have longer shadows. And then last chance to adjust how high that elevation is, right? So if you have these craters stick up, it's going to be longer, darker shadows. If you have it a little bit lower, you get a little bit more of the surface to prevail. Ooh, I like this one. All right, so I'm going to render this one, and then of course we need to go to the next step and spherize this again. All right, now you notice that there are some edges here that are not perfectly aligned. There's a couple of ways to fix that. One is to simply crop it with the crop tool, right? You could go here to the crop tool and say, okay, you know, let's ignore, or let's abandon some of it and just crop to this part. I'm going to cancel that. Instead, another option you have too is to filter, transform, and look at the rubber sheet. And with the rubber sheet, you can grab the corners and move them a little bit outside of the limit there. And then that will render that image a little bit bigger, and some of it, the soft edges, will disappear. So that's another technique you might find very useful as well, especially if you actually have a slant or a perspective distortion that you'd like to correct as well. Let's see, there's probably a couple of other ways to work with this, but I'm really happy with this one. So I'm going to go and first of all, I'm going to store this, and then I'm going to create a spherical view of this with the spherize. And here's our second planet. So let's give it some nice bluish tint, perhaps here again, even a little bit of an atmospheric blue, and really so many different ways that you could work this. Bit of a reddish is good. Let's go directional. Let's make it a little bit smaller so we have a little bit more border around it here. We do have some specular highlight, particularly visible if you also have the terrain enabled here with some reflection or some mountainous peaks. Here's the amount of that. Here's the scale. Let's not overdo it. Okay, and the specular intensity there. All right, I think I'll call this my planet, and I'm going to go and store this one. I'm going to select it with the magic wand, select the background, and then invert the selection once more. Invert selection, and pick the selection as a brush, and then store that and manage it. So now we have another planet. So we have two very different planets, and now it's time to start compositing, right? Working with these two planets. We're going to create an image of 1280 by 720. Let's go unconstrain this and say 720. There you go. And maybe we'll take a shortcut for the background skies. Maybe we'll render some plasma noise, and let's go with the HSV mode. Let's go turn that into grayscale. Image Boom, 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 boom. There it is. Grayscale, exposed through lens. Just love this. I love this thing. Look at that. Oh, I love this. Look at that. And then so I'm going to go and adjust the contrast a little bit with the value here. I want to have this glowing a little bit. So let's see if we can brighten a little bit. Higher contrast. There. All right. Now we need to make this a little bit dimmer, maybe even give it a little bit of a bluish tint. So let's go adjust color and add less red, so that will give it, reveal more of the blue and green. We can reduce even the green a little bit. And in fact, reduce all of them so they get really darker and the blue just prevails, but it's still very dark as well. All right. Might perhaps go into expanding dynamic range, so some of the brighter parts get to the maximum brightness. Maybe not too much, so use that interactive undo a little bit to find a good middle ground in between. And so now we have our background colors for the nebula. Maybe we need some stars as well. Let's do another quick shortcut. That's with the settings on the brushes. Let's make sure we're on the brush tool. And look, oh, actually, no, right click on the brush tool and look for effects, or rather organic effects, and look for starry. All right, with the starry, we can we can draw some stars. Let's go and store this background here, store an image copy. So I'm going to need to adjust the opacity on the stars. I'm going to need to adjust the steps distance, so it takes a little bit more distance to travel with the brush before another one gets displayed. And then I want some size, and random size in particular. Random size, and there you go. And I may want also some random value or brightness, so they're not all appearing the same brightness. And let's see, let's go boom boom, couple of dabs around here. And then increase the steps, or decrease it if you want, and change the size to smaller, and paint a couple of areas with even smaller stars. Get a bit of variety here or there. And then do the opposite. Now we do the maximum size, and we'll have only few. So increase the step fairly high. Opacity is still full. Now this time we won't do random value, but we will do still some random position. There you go, and get a couple of bright ones there. Alright, so we see this background combination coming pretty good. One thing you want to do also, by the way, if you look at the dark area here, if that is to represent dark matter, you really should have fewer stars in there, especially the small stars. Right? You should perhaps not paint too much on top of that. And then over here where the bright nebula is, it really pays to give some detail work there and actually have also not too many stars, but have a few bright ones. In fact, you would want to use this tool here, the right click, where you have the gradients, but you also have the nova and nova options. Maybe we'll take 16 or 8 star appearance. And then pick a color like a light yellow or greenish, a right color also with bluish or maybe a magenta, and put a bright star here as well. All right, so that's another way that you can put some nice, interesting details in some areas where a star is born, where some new bright stars are adding to the scene. Another one you could use, of course, is the lens flares. Now careful, you don't want those lens flares to have too many reflections. Some of these here will have a lot of reflections, and it probably is too bright or too early to do that. You may have one really bright sun in the end that will add that reflection, but for purely starry appearance, maybe some of these blue or yeah, this one here, this blue one will be a good addition. Has a little bit of a glow and adds nicely to that area where there are some new young stars being born. without being too much in terms of reflections or lens reflections showing all over the scene. Okay. All right. So let's go and store this image as well. And so now we need to get our planets back into the scene. All right. So let's go to planet number 1. That was this blue one. Let's go enable the preview, PRV, and here it is. And so now this one might be a little bit too big. Maybe we want it a little bit smaller. Something like this. Maybe we also want it less blue, less intense in the color. So the hue, saturation, right now we have, okay, let's go back to its original. It was something like this. And also less on the saturation, so a little bit more of a grayish tint. There you go. And it's a little bit too bright, so the value can go down as well. There. And so what I'll do is create one. Now, one thing you need to plan ahead is where's the sun going to be, or the bright star nearby around which this planet is obviously turning. Well, based on the lighting, it would be somewhere in the upper left, right? If you look at the lighting on the planet, if I stamp it down here, and by the way, you still have the random position there. Be careful to remove that random position, which we used for the stars. Now when it comes to the planet, you want to have a better sense of where it's going to actually place. So we do have, we can, for instance, place it right here, and that would then mean that given the lighting effects here, that the bright sun will probably need to be around here. Or maybe you've already placed it, but it's always good to actually put the sun a little bit later so that you have the glow and the lens flares showing over the planet as well. So let's go. Let's say we wanted actually the bright sun in the lower left, then we need to rotate this, right? So you have the scale and the rotation on the stored brush. We can use that to kind of rotate it a little bit like this. All right, so let's go back and enable the preview, and maybe we need about this much on that planet. And sometimes it doesn't take it to first, so click a second, and there it is. And then what you do is switch to the next planet, and this one is going to be a different orientation. Oh, look at that. I like this mode. Let's just plant it right there. Maybe it's a little bit too big. Okay, let's go make it a little bit smaller and have a little bit of an overlap or not. So many different ways to compose it. Now let's make also a tiny little one far away. And it doesn't have to be another one. You can do a lot of really interesting scenes with just one planet. I'm going to make a really small one, very small one. There it is, and reduce the saturation to next to nothing, so it's got a dark gray look. Let's also reduce the value. There you go. And then perhaps that's about it. It could be a small one orbiting this big one, so it would be perhaps overlapping and slightly in front, or it could be anywhere in the back there. You just need to bring together the rotation so that it's also showing the lighting in a good way. So perhaps something like this. What do you think? Let's place it here. All right, and now it's time to add some magic nova or lens flares again. And now it's okay to perhaps have one that's really bright, and also adds some lens flares and reflections there. Let's see. One of my favorites is this one here in the lower left. You see there's many different ways to make the magic happen here. Maybe add 2 or 3 of them. Maybe add also one that doesn't have much of lens flares, but just adds a little bit of a glow there. And that's it. We now have another piece of artwork with this time with some planets in there too. Thanks for watching. I hope this was insightful and useful, and that you'll be able to use these techniques starting from your coffee cup. And you'll see actually as you look around, you'll probably find there are a lot of different places with some dimples or patterns that can be used straight as a planet surface. And it just takes a little bit of lighting and embossing and some other techniques to make it look like that. All right, talk to you soon.